Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Book Time with Elvis, and indeed the latest edition of Short Stories Saturday. Today we have a very nice short story in store for you. It is called The Kiss and it's by Kate Chopin. I'm saying Chopin like the composer. I hope that's the correct way to say it. Who is Kate Chopin? Do you know her? Have you read any of her books? She's most famous for the short novel The Awakening, which I haven't read yet, but I have got it, and a collection of short stories. I did again choose one at random, and the one I chose was this one called The Kiss. Kate Chopin was actually born Catherine O'Flaherty, and she was born in 1851 and died in 1904. She's regarded as an early feminist writer, and she basically turned to writing to make money after her husband left her to the equivalent in today's money of around $1.5 million in debt upon his death. She had to move back in with her own mother, but unfortunately she promptly died after she moved there, and writing was a way for her to to try and make ends meet. She had several children, 6 children in fact, so you can understand money would have been extremely important for her. She wrote predominantly on Cajun and Bayou themes. She was from St. Louis, Missouri. She actually got driven out of town because her family supported the Confederacy. That was, I think, after the Civil War, and she went to live in New Orleans before eventually, as I say, returning to live in her family home in St. Louis, Missouri. She wrote 2 collections of short stories as well as 2 novels. The collections are Bayou Folk, which was published in 1894, and A Night in Acadia in 1897. Probably her most famous short stories would be Desiree's Baby, The Story of an Hour, The Storm, and that's that really. Well, I suppose I should mention the 2 novels she wrote. The first I already mentioned, which was The Awakening, published in 1899, and one called At Fault, which was published 9 years earlier, and both of which are set. The Awakening is set in New Orleans, and the At Fault is set in New Orleans, and Grand Isle is set. Dear oh dear, what's happened to me today? At Fault is set in New Orleans, and The Awakening is set in Grand Isle. So let's jump right in and look at the short story, The Kiss. The Kiss. It was still quite light out of doors, but inside, with the curtains drawn and the smouldering fire sending out a dim, uncertain glow, the room was full of deep shadows. Brantain sat in one of these shadows. It had overtaken him, and he did not mind. The obscurity lent him courage to keep his eyes fastened as ardently as he liked upon the girl who sat in the firelight. She was very handsome, with a certain fine, rich colouring that belongs to the healthy brune type. She was quite composed, as she idly stroked the satiny coat of the cat that lay curled in her lap, and she occasionally sent a slow glance into the shadow where her companion sat. They were talking low, of indifferent things, which plainly were not the things that occupied their thoughts. She knew that he loved her, a frank, blustering fellow, without guile enough to conceal his feelings, and no desire to do so. For 2 weeks past, he had sought her society eagerly and persistently. She was confidently waiting for him to declare himself, and she meant to accept him. The rather insignificant and unattractive Brantain was enormously rich, and she liked and required the entourage which wealth could give her. During one of the pauses between their talk of the last tea and the next reception, the door opened, and a young man entered, whom Brantain knew quite well. The girl turned her face toward him. A stride or two brought him to her side, and bending over her chair before she could suspect his intention, for she did not realize that he had not seen her visitor, he pressed an ardent, lingering kiss upon her lips. Brantain slowly arose. So did the girl arise, but quickly, and the newcomer stood between them, a little amusement and some defiance struggling with the confusion in his face. "I believe," stammered Brantain, "I see that I have stayed too long. I had no idea. That is, I must wish you goodbye." He was clutching his hat with both hands, and probably did not perceive that she was extending her hand to him. Her presence of mind had not completely deserted her, but she could not have trusted herself to speak. "Hang me if I saw him sitting there, Natty. I know it's deuced awkward for you, but I hope you'll forgive me this once. This very first break. Why, what's the matter?" "Don't touch me. Don't come near me," she returned angrily. "What do you mean by entering the house without ringing?" "I came in with your brother, as I often do," he answered coldly, in self-justification. "We came in the side way. He went upstairs, and I came in here hoping to find you. The explanation is simple enough, and ought to satisfy you that the misadventure was unavoidable. But do say that you forgive me, Natalie," he entreated, softening. "Forgive you? You don't know what you're talking about. Let me pass. It depends upon a good deal whether I ever forgive you." At the next reception, which she and Brantain had been talking about, she approached the young man with a delicious frankness of manner. When she saw him there, "Will you let me speak to you a moment or two, Mr. Brantain?" she asked, with an engaging but perturbed smile. He seemed extremely unhappy, but when she took his arm and walked away with him, seeking a retired corner, a ray of hope mingled with the almost comical misery of his expression. She was apparently very outspoken. "Perhaps I should not have sought this interview, Mr. Brantain, but I've been very uncomfortable, almost miserable since that little encounter the other afternoon, when I thought how you might have misinterpreted it and believed things." Hope was plainly gaining the ascendancy over misery in Brantain's round, guileless face. "Of course, I know it is nothing to you, but for my own sake I do want you to understand that Mr. Harvey is an intimate friend of long standing. Why, we have always been like cousins. Like brother and sister, I may say. He is my brother's most intimate associate, and often fancies that he is entitled to the same privileges as the family. Oh, I know it is absurd, uncalled for, to tell you this, undignified even," she was almost weeping, "but it makes so much difference to me what you think of me." Her voice had grown very low and agitated. The misery had all disappeared from Brantain's face. "Then you do really care what I think, Miss Natalie? May I call you Miss Natalie?" They turned into a long, dim corridor that was lined on either side with tall, graceful plants. They walked slowly to the very end of it. When they turned to retrace their steps, Brantain's face was radiant. Hers was triumphant. Harvey was among the guests at the wedding, and he sought her out in a rare moment when she stood alone. "Your husband," he said, smiling, "has sent me over to kiss you." A quick blush suffused her face and round, polished throat. "I suppose it's natural for a man to feel and act generously on an occasion of this kind. He tells me he doesn't want his marriage to interrupt wholly that pleasant intimacy which has existed between you and me. I don't know what you've been telling him," with an insolent smile, "but he has sent me here to kiss you." She felt like a chess player who, by the clever handling of his pieces, sees the game taking the course intended. Her eyes were bright and tender with a smile as they glanced up into his, and her lips looked hungrily for the kiss which they invited. "But, you know," he went on quietly, "I didn't tell him so. It would have seemed ungrateful. But I can tell you. I've stopped kissing women. It's dangerous." Well, she and Brantain and his million left. A person can't have everything in this world, and it was a little unreasonable of her to expect it. Gosh, I enjoyed that, and it was a really short story. Certainly made me want to check out Kate Chopin even more, I think, and I'll have to set some time aside to read The Awakening. Won't take very long, I think. It is quite a small novel. Never came across the name Brantain before. I don't know whether that's a particularly southern name. I did like the whole kind of manipulative character of Natalie. I mean, it's amazing how much we can glean just from a story as short as that. I mean, the fact that she's very obviously a gold digger. She wants to continue her affair, if you like, with this other gentleman, Mr. Harvey. And yeah, I really enjoyed the ending, where obviously Brantain wanted to be kind by sending Mr. Harvey over to kiss Natalie, because they're supposedly like cousins and old family friends, when in fact, of course, they are lovers. And there's something a little bit sinister would be the wrong word, but there is something very sneaky about it, and almost I feel that Kate Chopin is giving us a little wink while she writes that ending. So I do hope you enjoyed it, and we will of course be back next week with another edition of Short Story Saturday. So do take care of yourselves, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and all the best from Elvis and I. Bye bye.